Bienvenidos de nuevo a Oportunidades en Grecia, el podcast en el que tratamos de acercar las oportunidades que en el marco de la internacionalización, de la exportación, la inversión y la captación de financiación, el país presenta para la empresa española. Welcome again to Oportunidades en Grecia, the podcast where we try to get business opportunities regarding exports and investments in the country, Greece, closer to Spanish companies. Today, in this our 19th episode, we go back to energy. Plenty of news on the topic in Greece lately in the news, as I say, newspapers. Latest investments in renewables, wind capacity up for around, I think, 4% on a yearly basis this year. Big investors in renewables from third countries entering the market and therefore the region. Greece improving its position in the ranking elaborated by EY that measures the profitability of renewable investments among the developed economies. Announcements of the immediate approval of the strategy for environmental impact evaluation and future creation of an SPV to work on feasibility studies for offshore wind parks, milestones in the interconnector project Greece-Cyprus, and so on and so forth. So a lot of it on the plate, I would say, and we're very lucky to have here with us today Rikard, who will tell a ton more about these things in a bit. Hi, Rikard, how are you? Welcome, and thanks for joining.
Muchísimas gracias, Jorge. Es un placer estar aquí.
So let me introduce briefly Rikard, who is, I would say, an enormous, great expert in the field, energy. He is currently chairman of Hellenic Hydrocarbons Energy Resources, which, if it's fine, we'll call from now on HEREMA, where he leads an international board of directors responsible for monetizing the country's energy resources, revitalizing Greece's upstream sector, and attracting new global investors to generate the funds needed to finance the energy transition, and in parallel, expanding HEREMA beyond oil and gas into renewables, decarbonization, and infrastructure. He's been in the sector for very many years, I would say around 25 probably.
Yeah, it's coming up to that now, yeah.
I think we're all coming up to that point. With a long experience in the sector, very specifically, I would like to mention the experience, and I think we'll tackle it afterwards, on the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, the so-called TAP, and he's been a senior official for BP also for very many years. And without further ado, let me jump into the Q&A. Rikard, first of all, could you tell us a bit more about HEREMA, the Hellenic Hydrocarbons and Energy Resources? What is it?
So it is the company that oversees a number of Greece's national energy resources. Originally set up really to focus on oil and gas. The company now has more than a decade in existence. Now we have recently undergone a quite substantive transformation also of the company. This was really sort of the three lead pillars that we've been working on in the new board and also the new CEO who took over in 2020, where those three pillars are really helping to modernize the company and the governance of the company to best international standards. The second being really, as you said in your introduction, to create a very investor-friendly context, to bring on board new investors to work alongside the very good Greek companies that we have in the sector, really with the ambition to explore and monetize Greece's hydrocarbon resources, in particularly focusing on natural gas. And thirdly, to expand and diversify the company's operations to really be able to create a more holistic solution to how we advance the energy transition. And as you also mentioned in your introduction, this is what has brought us into renewables, where we have launched the country's first offshore wind program, decarbonizations. We have also launched the country's first carbon capture program, mostly known as CCS and CCUS. And of course, we've also acquired part of the infrastructure that relates to the sector.
Let me then, which I think it reflects somehow what's happened with the company. Let's talk a little bit about the latest, latest Greek developments in the Greek market. How would you assess the evolution of and the use of the different energy sources, oil and gas? I would not say versus renewables rather than versus renewables in Greece in the last decades.
I think it's fair to say that going back 15, 20 years, Greece was not necessarily a big actor in energy, in the energy sector, sort of from a European perspective. This has changed dramatically in these last decades. You mentioned one of the projects that I was previously involved in, the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline. That project, which opens up a new European energy corridor between the Caspian and and Europe, of course, has Greece as a protagonist in the project. It is the biggest geography of the pipeline, who then also goes through Albania and into Italy. I think that sort of started getting people's eyes open for the very important role that Greece could play in this. Obviously, what we are doing today in terms of trying to monetize the gas resources is also having a big impact on this. There is an increasing realization that whilst I think in many respects hydrocarbons is something of the past, and we all want to work towards a greener and more sustainable future where new and alternative technologies, and particularly in renewables, will play a dominant role, gas will still play an important role for the foreseeable future, in particularly in this region, which historically has been both very dependent on coal and, of course, highly dependent also on Russia, which has proven to be somewhat of a fickle and partner after the horrible events that have been playing out in Ukraine. And then finally, of course, as you also mentioned, the Greek focus on renewables, where we have seen an absolutely mind-boggling growth over the last couple of years. So I think today Greece has gone from something that frankly was not much discussed in energy terms in the past, into having carved out a role where it is actually very important both in the region and in Europe, and is increasingly getting recognized for having managed to get ahead on the curve on a lot of these things in terms of building an integrated solution to this big challenge that we're all struggling with, how to manage now of the sort of climate risk and the whole energy transition.
Well, I think you mentioned a little bit what the role of HEREMA could be within this framework that you just mentioned. But could you elaborate a little bit more? How does HEREMA fit into all this?
Well, I think when we are having conversations, in the board and with our amazing executive team that we now have in place, this is one of the questions that we also ask. How can we fit into this? How can we be a constructive catalyst for really bringing these things forward? And I think there's a number of things that we can do. One is obviously to manage to the best of our capacity and capability those areas of the energy sector that we look at and oversee specifically. I think another thing where we can contribute is, because most of the people today on our board and the CEO have substantive international experience, is also bringing with us the experiences that we have built up globally in terms of, it's not only about running the projects, but it's also about putting these projects in a context where we also implement very strict environmental standards, very strict socioeconomic standards. In essence, the challenge is to create a value proposition or a number of value propositions that can resonate at all different levels. And I think the third part is recognizing that we are part of something much bigger, both on the policy level, but also on the commercial and industrial level in Greece, where there is a lot of activity. So we want to be part of that debate, with a particular focus maybe on trying to bring in additional levels of pragmatism into this debate. How can we pool all our resources, our capital, financial resources, our policy resources, our engineering capacity, etc., to really create something that will help us to get to where we need to get to in the future. And this is sometimes why we call our strategy Hydrocarbons 2.0, basically trying to communicate that this notion where I think we have been a little bit stuck as Europe and actually globally for a while, that this is somehow a binary solution. It is doing oil and gas, or it is moving towards renewables. I think our approach is that binary mindset is not going to fix this. What we need to do is we need to bring every opportunity to the table and make all those opportunities work in the direction of advancing the transition. And when we are introducing this and when we are communicating this line, it's a very positive reaction we get, and it's a very constructive conversation, both at industry level as well as policy level.
I can hear you there out and clear. I think clearly HEREMA goals are quite adapted, as probably could be differently to Greece's aspirations in the energy sector, the national plan. What could you tell us about the national plan? I think it goes from 23 to 30. There's some clear goals when it comes to renewables. I clearly see that there is a clear fit what HEREMA does. What's your take on the national plan and its goals?
I think it's a very aspirational plan, but I also think it is an achievable plan. It set down some tough targets in terms of driving the renewable part in the energy mix. I think we're looking at somewhere between 70 and 80% by 2030. I think that the reality is that if some people had seen this plan 10 or 20 years ago, they may not have believed it to be feasible. I think what we see today is there is a commitment from industry, and there is also a really strong commitment from the political class, in particularly from the Ministry of Energy and the Prime Minister's office to really push this. And it's getting the results. It wasn't just in Greece, but I would say globally, that the news resonated a while back that Greece was actually producing all of its energy need equivalent from renewable energies. This is an astonishing achievement. So I think the plan is sort of advancing in progress. It's expensive. The energy transition is going to be expensive. And I think that after the developments that we saw in 21 and 22 also, there's an increasing realization as well in many quarters that it's a lot more complex and challenging than we may have thought. But I think the plan is progressing. It is advancing towards the target. Our role in this is to play our part. And a significant component of that is, of course, trying to monetize those resources that we have. We will see what is the outcome of our exploration work now. We are working with companies like Hellenic Energy, but also global companies like ExxonMobil. The purpose here is to see how we can monetize the resources. Hopefully this will have, I think it's fair to say, a potentially transformative economic impact. But that can also then be channeled into help stimulating the growth across the other sectors. So we're working to this, and we have a pretty tight time frame till 2030.
Yes, I guess it is like that everywhere. The schedule is quite tight everywhere, in abroad as well, right? Also in Spain. Precisely, I wanted to ask you about some of the challenges or bottlenecks that the project might face. I think we always hear about the grid. And we see the advances that have been realized when it comes to interconnecting the islands and the continent, mainland, and also advances regarding the connection with the northern part of the European Union, or the countries also with the south. I would like to know a little bit more how do you see the grid limitation and or potential. And I would also like to ask you about storage, which is another thing that is an issue also in other countries, like, for instance, in Spain as well. And I would also like to ask you about stakeholder sort of opposition or difficulties that this project might face. How do you think those can be dealt with in the case of Greece?
Well, I think, first of all, the challenges that we see in Greece around all of these issues are not Greek-specific challenges. They are challenges that you see everywhere in the world. If we start with the technical aspect, so to speak, I think that there is today a growing realization that a functioning energy system has many parts, which is what makes it complex. My view is that there has been maybe a disproportionate focus for a long time on the generation side. Photovoltaics and wind energy are really powerful. In Greece in particular, obviously, we don't need to emphasize to anybody how much the sun is shining in this country, and having had a bit of a heat wave in the recent weeks, we certainly have felt that. What may be less known is that Greece also has got some of the best wind energy conditions in Europe, not to say in the world. So the generation side here is very important. But there is today also an increasing realization that there is additional layers to this, which is where some of the complexity sits. You then need to transport and do the transmission of that electricity to where it's going to be needed and used. And we have not advanced the build out of the grid networks in Europe in the same pace. So this represents a challenge. We have seen this in several locations as it gets really hot and everybody turns on their air conditioning units. The grids have to, they became overloaded. In the future, we will put a lot more into these grids, so there's a need to build out the grids. And the third component of this is, of course, the consumption as well as the storage. We haven't really fixed the storage problem. There is huge advances in battery technology and in hydrogen, but there are also complexities going into this. The amount of green hydrogen today, which is generated from renewables, is significantly smaller than blue hydrogen, which is generated by natural gas, where you sequestrate the carbon component. So this is something that we need to address and grow the green hydrogen. Battery technology is advancing fast. But in order to build these batteries, we're going to need a lot of raw materials, critical raw materials. And many of those critical raw materials are found elsewhere in the world, oftentimes in areas where it is challenging to do business, and also where they are found inside Europe. I think there is an understanding that we need to reinforce our domestic supply. But that brings us to the second part of your question, which is then the stakeholder question. There is this concept of NIMBY, which is everybody wants it, but NIMBY, which stands for "but not in my backyard." Again, this is not a Greek phenomena. This is something that is a global phenomena. I have had exactly these experiences working in South America, working in Southeast Asia, working in Africa, working in various markets in Europe. But I also think that it is something that we can manage. We just need to accept that we need to manage it in a better way. So to give you maybe a parallel on the previous project I was involved in here in Greece, the TAP project. When I joined that project in 2011, we had, fair to say, a challenging situation, both on the political level and the stakeholder level. Focusing on the stakeholder level, I always felt that there was a significant trust deficit among stakeholders. We came into this with the aspirations to really do a good project, safeguarding our environmental impact and our social and socioeconomic impact. But I realized very quickly that there wasn't a lot of trust that we were really going to do this. So we spent a lot of efforts and a lot of both financial capital and sort of leadership capital engaging with all these communities that would be affected. For those who don't know, the project built a 550 kilometer pipeline corridor through all of northern Greece. So through 31 or 32 municipalities, and directly affecting over 14,000 landowners. That we implemented a number of programs about how to acquire the land, making sure that those adhere to the highest project finance standards. We implemented a lot of community investment programs. And maybe most of all important, we also had very active engagement with the community. So we went out and we presented our findings, our environmental and social impact assessments, to let people voice their concerns, their opinions, oftentimes coming up with suggestions, to be honest, how maybe we could do things better, often realizing that where we had a lot of pushback, that pushback may have originated in something pretty innocuous, like somebody wanting to do a development on a piece of land and they thought this would now be jeopardized. So by simply making some adjustments to our thinking, I think we did over 120 minor route adjustments for the pipeline. We ended up with a project that actually had, and I like data, so I like polling, and we had 95% approval among our stakeholder communities. So the key message for me to all, both industry and operators, as well as communities, is the NIMBY effect is very real, and I understand it. It is up on us as business leaders to really take the time to understand what are the concerns that we see among our affected stakeholders, and how can I engage with them to create value propositions that really resonates with them on an individual level. If you are a landowner somewhere in northern Greece, you may of course appreciate that a big project like TAP will have a significant geostrategic impact, and it may have a national strategic impact, etc., and all these things that we like to talk about, the big picture stuff. But in the end of the day, what is really going to determine the value you see from the project is, will it be safe during the construction period? Will my kids be safe? Will I be fairly compensated for the land? Is there a value to me here? Is this project really making an effort to integrate with my local community and contribute something beyond just a technical project? And when you get that right, I have seen repeatedly how projects that start off in a very contentious place can actually become very, very successful.
I totally agree. I think most of the times the deal is the story is to get to know what people actually think, what they actually feel, and try to figure out a tailor-made solution on one in each case, so that the thing can go ahead. I think you talking about TAP gives me a great opportunity to move on a little bit on the conversation because TAP is one of those projects that clearly exemplifies the fact that Greece is part of a wider picture, right? The regional picture in terms of energy, a worldwide picture. I would like to ask you what the effects of some of the later conflicts are in the energy markets in the country, both in the country and in the region. And if you could also tell us a little bit within that broader, bigger picture, a little bit on regulatory and policy developments.
Energy is one of the fundamental motors of the economy and therefore on national competitiveness. So energy will always have a significantly strategic and geostrategic role. Of course, the energy as we have seen it for many other decades now have also had the negative consequences that we're now debating. I'm talking here in particular about conventional energy. So I think the big challenge is how do we capture the positive components of this while we're mitigating and hopefully to the extent we can eliminating the negative components. So there's so many layers of complexity here. I personally feel that there was a period where we may have lost a little bit our footing in terms of balancing all those priorities. I think there is a negative aspect to that, but I also think it's a good aspect to this. What I mean by that is there was a lot of focus on the sustainability component of energy. Now, that is critical. If we accept, and I think most people today do, that climate change actually poses an existential threat, then everything else dwarfs in comparison. And it's important that we understand that this is really what is at stake. So the sustainability part here is of course, I would probably say, the overriding critical consideration. However, when you get this balancing skewed, there are other aspects in this balancing act. One of those aspects is cost. When we had a period where we saw a sharp decline in investments in energy, so it was less input, but we still really hadn't changed the fundamental consumption patterns of energy, and we still had the issues around grid connectivity, etc. Then we got an imbalance. There was a supply and demand imbalance. When you get a supply and demand imbalance, simple economic arithmetics will tell you that the prices will adjust accordingly, which is why in 2021 we saw a huge spike in particularly in gas prices, which affected both European households and European industry, and by extension many European governments who had to step in with supportive mechanisms. The year later, as we saw Russia's attack on Ukraine and the ensuing sanctions, etc., a lot of the energy supply that Europe had gotten used to was off the table. This then translated into the emergence of an energy security crisis. Now, I think that this has been pretty well managed. I think in particularly the pragmatic approach that Greece has taken to a lot of these things, where I think we have played a small part of this in terms of mobilizing both the gas piece and the renewables, the infrastructure and the sequestration. I think it has been managed well, but it has really driven home the realization that this is really, really complex, and it really needs to put the best brains from industry, government, regulators, NGOs, civil society, around the table to debate how are we going to fix this? What is our plan? We all know the destination. It's not difficult to understand and to find out what are the part components today. The real question is, how do we get from here to where we need to get to in a way that does not, again, create imbalances that start creating other difficulties and risks? And I think this is how the geopolitical component plays into this with some of the developments that we have seen. And we could probably do a whole podcast around that subject as well, because when you then add to that the additional complexity of sourcing critical minerals from different parts of the world, where we have seen some countries now building up an almost monopoly on processing of critical minerals, etc. It raises a huge level of complexity that will be one of the determining components in geopolitics for decades to come.
Listen, now that we have been talking about the company, about HEREMA, that we've been listening to your take on Greek developments, and that we have also talked about the broader approach to energy in terms of geopolitics and so on. What do you think are the fields where Spanish companies could cooperate with HEREMA, and also, if you could figure some of them within the country with potentially other companies within the sector, energy, renewables included?
But I think in a wide range of fields. Of all the people in the world, you're the last person I probably need to sort of emphasize the fact that Spain has got really strong global companies in energy, across conventional energy to renewable energy, to supporting industries, to the energy sector, etc. Some of them were involved, as you may know, in the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. That was a huge success. We have companies here, as we have launched now the national offshore wind program. Spain has got some of the world's leading companies in this sector. So I think there are immense commercial opportunities. I also think that there is these commercial opportunities. Once you start realizing bilateral commercial opportunities, there is also so much more that tends to come in the wake of that development in terms of the broader bilateral cooperation. And I think in this context as well, I think what we are seeing is the European South, if I may say so, as opposed to the global South, but the European South, Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Cyprus, should have a stronger voice also in Europe. There is an increasing realization that many of these very important agendas are moving south, if I can say so, and certainly in the energy sector, which also means that the voice from the European South should be amplified in the broader European debate. And I think this is areas where Spain and Greece, both on a bilateral level and a multilateral level, have huge opportunities to collaborate. So I'm very positive to this. I'm very positive to the experience and the expertise that we see in Spain. And I will say, our door will always be open to Spanish companies to come in and collaborate closely.
It's great to hear. It's great to hear that. Absolutely. Some of the ideas that I can collect with the tone of them, but some of them from the conversation. The company HEREMA has undergone some changes towards corporate standards, best corporate standards, an investor-friendly company, and well-diversified when it comes to different energy resources. When it comes to the country, to Greece, I think you made a difference between previous dependency versus rather autonomy these days. When it comes to the company, I think you mentioned pragmatism, which I think it was a very, very clear and important idea. Hydrocarbon 2.0, you consider feasible, of course, the national plan. We talk about the challenges, though. There are some. They're no different from those that are being tackled or dealt with in other geographies. And then we talk about the wider picture. I think I recall there three words. You mentioned sustainability, you mentioned cost, and you mentioned security. And of course, plenty of opportunity, a nice window of opportunity for Spanish companies to cooperate with Greek companies. So I'd like to boost the activity in the energy sector. I thank you very much for joining us today. Rikard, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. It's been very nice to be here.
Y nosotros nos vemos de nuevo en Oportunidades en Grecia. Aún hay mucho por conocer, desde el agroalimentario, gourmet, hasta la financiación multilateral, desde el equipamiento en el sector eléctrico, hasta la banca de desarrollo local. Hasta pronto.